Welcome, everyone. Another very promising evening lecture with Frank RUDA, he's going to be speaking on the topic of courage and event. We are familiar with this a little bit from this week, and it has been, I have to say, one of the most exciting seminars I have attended in my years in this room. Let me put it that way. So, not only that, but I know that what he's about to say comes right out of the oven. So it's not he's not repeating himself. So I'm very excited to hear what he will present. It really has been a beautiful week with his work, also with Milad and Delars. But now we hear the fruits, I think, of Frank's thinking. And with that, I just want to thank him very, very warmly for everything he's done this week and in general with the EGS, but particularly for this work on courage in the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
We can't hear you.
Okay.
Online.
Now. Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, I was just expressing my gratitude to Chris and trying to say how immensely anxifying this institution is for me. And I mean this in the best possible way. So courage and event. With the title I have chosen, I place my reflections in a conjuncture with and context of a number of influential and important book titles. This is not meant in any self-aggrandizing way, but rather to indicate where this project places itself, where my thoughts situate themselves, and what its or their inner rationality lies. This is why I want to begin to say a few words about this very place. The series of books I have in mind are obviously the famous books with an end in the middle, beginning with Martin Heidegger's Being Enzyme, 1927, which was then followed by Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness in 1943. And I would add to the series also Alain Badiou's 1988 Being an Event, which actually has two sequels, Logic of Worlds 2006 called Being an Event 2 and Immanence of Truths 2018 Being an Event 3. In this series, we move from being involved with time to its involvement with nothingness and then with the event to state just the obvious and just superficially. But it's precisely the last in the series of books, that is Badiou's, where one can find a silent inversion at play. For Badiou does not try to think being as the grounding principle of time or nothingness, or even of the event. He also does not think their identity, such that being is time, or being is nothingness, or being is evental, but he tries to conceive of the event as a ground of being, as an event, as that which allows for any account of being. In Badiou's parlance, this means that only through an event, saying this in a very concrete case, the invention of mathematics with the ancient Greeks, there's a discourse that speaks so abstractly, so detached from any concrete beings, that it speaks about whatever being at all. So something must have happened that made possible that there is a discourse in which we can speak, or better write, without reference to any object whatsoever. And this in such a way that it concerns whatever concrete beings. And this is what the mathematical discourse for Badiou does. But it speaks so abstractly, so formalistically, that it addresses whatever being. In this discourse itself, there can be further events, and these events transform and change our account of being. So post-Cantor, for example, we will have to think differently about the relationship between being and infinity, because Cantor and Cantor's consequences generated an extremely intriguing and powerful theoretical framework that demonstrates that it is thinkable that there are different sizes of infinity. I'm not going into any details here, but infinity knows different degrees. So something can be more or less infinite. And if being is internally infinite, it is infinitely infinite. For if there are different sizes of infinity, being itself might need to be thought differently, And we thereby, post-event, so to speak, discover and explore a truth about being. Events are thus generative, not only of our accounts of being, but of something true. So truth follows from an event. And the truth can be the truth of being, but the grounding principle are events. So post-Cantor, we truly need to conceive of being differently, and some elements of what I'm just very abbreviatingly reconstructing here were certainly also very present already in Heidegger, who tried to find a way of escaping what he called ontotheology, the idea that we conceive of being in terms of there being a highest being, a god, or whatever we want to call it. But the point I want to begin with is that with Badiou, the event comes first. And an event allows for the unfolding of consequences, and these consequences Badiou calls truths. And these even concern and affect our account of being. This is why Badiou thinks that ontology is where truths can happen. Truths can happen in ontology. That means we can change an ontology. This event-first approach, as I want to call it, does in my reading at the same time not lead to any form of vitalism. Why? Because the event that we're talking about here is per se plural or manifold. So there's not one event, there are events. And it's not an event of being, and that is crucial. So the events and being are detached from one another, even though an event allows for an account of being. But an event that enables being to, I would say, discursively be. Heidegger was in some sense right there. Right, there is no being, or being is nothing. Or more precisely, with another master thinker you listened to earlier today, there is less than nothing. There's no givenness unless something happens. Right? There is nothing, not even nothing, unless something happens. Something therefore must have happened such there will have been being. Put differently, if we do not want to assume that there is anything given, and if we endorse an idea that things are just given, we fall prey to what the analytic philosopher Wilfrid Sellars once called the myth of the given. And my friend Adrian Johnson once pointedly remarked that there is also always a danger of the myth reverting, of an inverted myth, namely the myth of the ungiven. So we think that there is just nothing given, right? There's just nothing given, but nothing is there. So if you want to avoid assuming that there is something given, we need to account for the very constitution of whatever we presume to be. That's what follows from this. Whatever we're talking about, we need to talk about its constitution, right? How it came to be. And this even amounts to accounting for the very ways in which we conceive of accounting for things. So something needs to have happened so that there is an account of being, or an account of accounting for being. And this is what I described very briefly with Badiou's account of the invention of mathematics, right? So mathematics was invented. It speaks very abstractly about stuff, and that stuff is, in some sense, being. We call it being. So it's not being at the ground, but something that is not being, something that isn't a something, but an occurrence, a happening. Any account of being depends, for Badiou, I think, on the account we give of an event. So right now, everything hinges on what does it mean that there's an event. Being can, for example, be thought as being multiply infinite and therefore not composed of anything, any once, after a certain point in time, where philosophy identifies an event happening in mathematics, and for Badiou, that name is Cantor. So Cantor does something to the thought of infinity, and from that moment on, we can think that being is inherently infinite. We can even see, but I'm not going into this today, that the multiply infinite account of being that we give is also non-atomic. So we do not get any minimal ones. We just get something that Badiou describes as pure multiplicity, infinity, if you wish, all the way through. And what that means is that the post-Cantor events consequences ultimately allow for a radical dissemination of our account of being that goes as far as making us see that being is ultimately composed not even of nothing, but just a name. Being is just a name. In some sense, this is the beginning of Hegel's logic. He says being, and then he says, what does it amount to? Nothing. But it means we just said said something, right? It's just a signifier, it's just a name. There's nothing, not even nothing, but then something happens that leads us to name, to account for something that is less than nothing. That is the trick that I think Badiou, and I'm trying to piggyback on his theory a little bit here, brings into the world. We name something that is less than nothing, and through the act of naming it, that is conditioned by something happening, there is nothing. So nothing is already a genesis or a result. And the way we account for it, and this is a consequence, is by giving it a name. I think this is actually how one can very consistently, but maybe that's something for the Q&A, read the beginning of Hegel's Science of Logic. But let me put this differently before I get more concrete. Philosophy starts, for Badiou at least, is to identify events. That is what Badiou thinks philosophy does. And events do not happen in philosophy. That's not the important thing, but outside of it. For example, in science, for example, in art, for example, in politics, for example, in love. And what philosophy does when it identifies an event in either of these non or extra philosophical practices, and you might see here and why philosophy always comes too late, to speak Hegelian. What it does when it identifies events, it identifies that someone identified outside philosophy an event. So philosophy tries to think that there is thinking outside of philosophy. Or put differently, it tries to identify when there is an identification of an event outside of philosophy. So philosophy is identifying acts of identification of events outside of philosophy. I mean, to put it very trivially, someone has said, "I love you." And philosophy says, "Ah, look, it's an event." Right? It identifies an identification of an event. Right? But now, and this is crucial, this identification is where there's always a wager. Because we might just be wrong. If you were ever in a shit relationship, you might, I mean, right? Or in a great relationship that failed, then you might not have been wrong, but it nevertheless failed, right? But we can make mistakes when it comes to identification. We have two layers of where failure can happen. Was this really a revolution? Or did they just gather the estates? That's a question that is still discussed vis-a-vis the French Revolution. It was just a constitutional gathering, so no revolution there. Is this really a world-changing new scientific theory? Or just, I don't know, abstract crap? Is this really art? Philosophy's act of identifying extra philosophical identifications of events is a wager, a bet, and therefore it needs courage. But it's not only that philosophy has to wager on what can count as an event, but it has to wager on the wager that outside of philosophy has taken place, that something has been an event. Philosophy, for example, can wager that the Russian Revolution, despite its disastrous ending, has been a historical, or to speak Hegelian, a world historical event. And this means to wager that those who wagered that it was an event are not simply wrong. It's a wager on a wager. And there's an interesting link here, I think, to Michel Foucault, who gave, I think, his last lecture course at the Collège de France on the courage of truth. That's what it was called, the courage de la vérité, which examines the ways in which one can courageously, wageringly speak the truth, despite all contexts and circumstances. And Foucault goes as far as to say, sometimes one has to speak the truth in the face of power. And that is why it takes courage to speak the truth, because one has to be indifferent who one is talking to. So the courage to identify courageous acts is what I think, but you think philosophy is. This is why it seems to me he responded, and the students who, or the people who took my seminar know of this anecdote already. Why, but you responded in a public debate or discussion in 2015 with Slavoj Žižek to a serious and demanding question that Žižek asked, and the Žižek's question was the following: do you have any conceptual instruments at hand? I'm reformulating, he put it differently, obviously. But I think this is the gist of what Slavoj said. To describe what allows for the identification of an event as an event, if you dismiss the concept of the death drive. So Žižek said the death drive is exactly that. The death drive is a form whereby we self-negatingly identify something really happening. For that, to explain any event whatsoever, we need a concept of the death drive. But you think the death drive ultimately sounds too much like death. And he finds it therefore problematic. So Badiou was basically saying, Slavoj, you're a closet Heideggerian. You're just a closet Heideggerian. You're thinking everything in terms of finitude in a problematic way. Slavoj replied, basically saying, but what do you say then when you don't say death drive? How do you identify an event as an event? And then Badiou said, well, I call that courage. I call that courage. Now, whatever precisely this means, but you indicated, I think, thereby that the concept of courage in philosophy and its outside, so to speak, is what is related to eventality as such. I want to say courage first. Right? It's not even events first. It's courage first, or the identification of events first. Right? But where does that come from? So courage is linked to the identification of an event as an event, or more precisely in philosophy, to an identification of identifications of events as events. If there are events in the discourse on being, as I just suggested, that which grounds being is not just an event, but must be the identification of the event as an event, or the identification of an event. Courage and event, you see. What the following reflections are trying to do is they're an attempt to verify, to experiment with what it means to substantiate the idea that events need to be identified, and the mode of identification is courage. So I'm trying to think through what does this ultimately mean. And I want to do this in a number of steps. The first one takes me through Hegel, and the last one through bits, the second one through bits in Badiou, and the final one, maybe surprisingly, but some people in the seminar wanted politics, to Lenin. So Hegel, Badiou, Lenin. So let me begin. On the 18th of October, 1818, Hegel gives his inaugural lecture as part of introducing his encyclopedia lectures at the Humboldt University in Berlin. He indicates that after a period in which it was difficult for any philosophy to exist at all, since the times were troublesome and politically topsy-turvy, and I quote, the urgency of times, unquote, overrode and overdetermined any possibility for thought. He calls it die Not der Zeit, so the need of the time. There was no possibility for thought to dwell in thought. There was just no time to think. Now the time has come for philosophy to return to the scene being, for now, in Hegel's view, the university in Berlin, and more generally, the Western world. So Hegel is the scene. For as Hegel elaborates, I quote, what is opposed to philosophy is on one hand, spirit's immersion in the interests of necessity and of everyday life, das Versenktsein des Geistes in die Interessen der Not und des Tages, unquote. So real misery and the misery of petty bourgeois existence, one could say. But on the other hand, the vanity of opinions, for if the soul is occupied with the latter, it leaves no room in itself for reason. The soul is, in Hegel's rendering, Gemüt. Right, so moodedness, the mood, is taken over by other things. There's no space for thinking. If there's too much immersion in life, the needs of life and opinions, might we say idle talk, and there's just no space, no room left for thought. Against this self-oblivious busyness that confounds in its vacuity and is, I quote again, unmasked and dispelled, unquote, what Hegel thinks we encounter now is the seriousness of truth. Ernst der Wahrheit, the seriousness of truth. What this means for Hegel is that now can be debunked the assumption that, quote, that nothing true can be recognized, and that only untrue, the temporal, and the transient enjoy the privilege, so to speak, of recognition. Hegel here attacks the problematic forms of historicism that he thought were all pervasive. All accounts of truth are context related, are historical, there is no trans-historical truth, and so forth. So problematic forms of historicism that claim that there is just no truth but history, and therefore different historical understandings of truth, and thereby proclaim the truth of this very historicism, maybe one could even say hystericism, to pun a pun by Lacan. It is a position that believes that there is nothing universally true and that the belief in truth is vain in the first place. So Hegel thought, when we're totally immersed in life, this is what we think. Right? It's just situatedness all the time. But Hegel claims that, I quote, a heart which is still in good health still has the courage to demand truth. And it is the realm of truth that philosophy is at home with, which it itself constructs and which we share in by studying it. Whatever is true and great and divine in life is so by virtue of the idea. The goal of philosophy is to grasp the idea in its true shape and universality. Let me reread the beginning. A heart which is still in good health still has the courage to demand truth. A heart, a cœur, we might say, to make Hegel's point even clearer, which is still a good heart, must have courage, courage. To have courage means to claim and persist in claiming that there is something universal, that there is truth, that there is something universal happening in the world. Well, if there is something universal happening in the world. Right? It means to insist, this is the outlook that we have, right? We look for something universal. And that's the condition for philosophy. Right? So we look at the world such that we look for something universal in it. For the world changes if we start from this point of view, that we can identify something true, something universally true in it, or if we believe this is not the case. This is why Hegel can claim, I quote, however man looks at the world looks back at him. So if we think everything is just relative contexts and context relative, right, and or historically relative, that's what we see everywhere, of course. But if we have the courage to look at the world so that we demand from the world, or look at the world and demand from the world that we only value what is universal in it, things change. He takes this insight even to determine what it means to believe and why religion has become translated into a matter of opinion, a matter of individual choice and feeling. Whereas for Hegel, the truth of religion, and I'm abbreviating as massively as he is himself in his Berlin speech, is that, I quote, everyone has the desire to come close to the infinite. That is why people are religious, because we want to grasp something infinite. Right? We want to be in touch with something infinite. In religion, in other words, we get the sense that life is more than just life, more than just biological life. It is another life in this life, an othering of life in life, an infinitizing of that which seems otherwise only finite. This is why we here encounter, I quote, the eternal within the temporal in religion, the eternal within the temporal, wherein the former does not have its foundation. Hegel even indicates that previously there has been a class of people who have been casted to endorse the eternal within the temporal. I quote, "In the past, there were also a class of people who, without teaching others, merely consecrated themselves to the service of the eternal. People who were so excluded from the rest of society and sacrificed that this useless life existed." They were totally useless, but that was their function. They were just inscribing the eternal into normal life, right? A trace of the eternal. Some people do not need to do what seems to be the most useless so that all people can live a useless life. Right? So some people need to do what seems to be most useless so that other people can live their life, but it's an inscription of something else. This is Hegel's argument in Berlin, 1818. So we find here ways ways of uselessness, one grounding the other. At the end, well, almost at the end of Hegel's lecture, Hegel states that therefore, the decision, Entschluss, to philosophize throws itself purely into thinking. Thinking is alone with itself. Das Denken ist einsam bei sich. It throws itself into itself as if into a boundless ocean. All the bright colors, all the bases are gone, all other friendly lights are extinguished, unquote. Earlier, he called that something like that, the night of the world, actually. And Slavoj is very good on that. Hegel states that thought needs to be courageous because thinking is thinking something infinite within itself, as the infinite is immanent. So put differently, Hegel is saying, just to make my point absolutely clear, for a long time, we have been immersed in just like everyday life. Now is the time for thought. But what does thought amount to? Thought is the inscription of infinity into life. This is why it's like leaping into a borderless ocean. But but thinking is also a loss of all bases and an extinguishing of all friendly lights. Profound disorientation, we could say. Hegel continues, only the one star, the inner star of spirit shines. It's the polar star. But it's natural that spirit, in its aloneness with itself, is overcome by a kind of horror. It does not yet know where it wants to go or where it is going. Among what has it disappeared, there is much that one would not give up at any price in the world. And in this loneliness, it has not yet been restored, and one is uncertain whether it will find itself again, whether anything will be restored. So thinking is losing everything for a moment, he's saying. Losing everything. Thinking to resolve to think, and what kind of resolve, which is a decision that seems to precede all decisions. So can one make that decision? Leads us into a domain, into a territory where disorientation reigns. Thinking, that's my abbreviated rendering of Hegel, is horrible. This is what Hegel is saying. It is encountering horror. But we should not be afraid of this horror. We should have the courage to face the horror of thought. In German, Hegel uses the term Grauen, which you would also hear in Morgengrauen, so the dawning of a new day. But the message is clear, I think. Thinking is thinking something new, something that is disorientating, because we get a new version of thinking. And thinking anew is disorientating. So let me put it differently. We only think if we make up what thinking is. We invent what thinking is. That is, in this sense, Hegel is profoundly anti-Kantian. Profoundly anti-Kantian. Because Kant thinks there are categories and concepts, and we know, right? We can register them, and somehow it works, and it works the same, and we can give a catalog and so forth. But this means to have the courage to accept that things will disappear, all things, even things that we assume to be our most intimately linked properties. To prepare for thought, to prepare for what it means to think, cannot imply to prepare for a loss of all things. Thinking, thereby, implies the loss of what we think thinking is. or thinking begins with the loss of what we think thinking is. It means to leap into an ocean without borders, where everything looks alike, wherein one is uncertain if one ever will find oneself again. To pun Heidegger, for Hegel, thinking is an Unbefindlichkeit, a discomfort, a malaise, an unstate of mind. And this is why it takes courage. And Heidegger comes very close to that when he describes our state as unhomeliness. Right? It takes courage to unstate the mind, to detach it, to unbind it, to delocalize it. As the transcript of Hegel's inaugural ends, the spirit must not fear to lose something that has true interest for him. It is his ... This very end enacts the point that Hegel is making. The three dots are the illusion that is thinking. Courage means to think thinking anew and erase allied whatever we thought was before. That is, and I think that's the definition of what Hegel gives, of the science of logic. That is thinking, thinkingly. So we think what thinking is by means of thinking. ... Hegel calls this dotting of reason, this reason as dotting, before the manuscript breaks off, the instinct of reason. Very close to the death drive, one could say. You see why that's an interesting formula. Thinking is here thus the instinctive dotting of reason, dotting any line. We might say a triple dotting any eye, from the line to the dot, to the point, to the pointing. This is, according to Hegel, what thinking is. Thinking is pointing, triple pointing. Have the courage to get to the point. That's what Hegel's saying. You right now have the courage to get to the point, to the points, to the illusion. Let's not forget, as in the early Marx, the point is to change it. The point is to change it. But how do we get the point? How to deal in points, so to speak. In Logics of Worlds, Alain Badiou argues, in what he calls one of his scholia, that any subject is nothing but a relation between an event and a world. And those who have been in my seminar will see a direct resonance with the reading of Walter Benjamin's reading of Hölderlin. Right? The subject is a relation between event and world. This is to say that the subject is a body within a given world which organizes itself autonomously in the aftermath of something that has happened. We go to a pub, we meet someone, we fall in love, and afterwards we're two, and we organize ourselves. Do we text all the time? Do we call? Do we see each other every day? Do we get a puppy? Stuff like that. This is why this type of relation is creative. That is to say that it invents the very relation in which it embodies itself in the world. Put differently, if you have a given world and something happens, say we fall in love, we generate a new relationship to the world. And how do we do so? By forming a new body. But you call that a subjective body. So a couple would be a subjective body. A couple, a subjective body, that then follows a logic of its own and is, in some sense, a world of its own, right? It's a world of its own. It even has its own language, right? We say, I don't know, we rename ourselves, have certain tics when we sweet talk or whatever, right? Stuff like that. The crucial bit is that this relation is embodied. The subject, and this shows there is no subject at the ground, but the subject emerges, is created when something happens, is the embodiment of a new relation to the world. A new relation to the world follows from something that is induced by an event, because it is what unfolds the consequences of what happened in the world. Going to a pub, meeting someone, thinking, yeah, let's exchange numbers. I'm definitely going to call you. Yes, okay. I changed my life for you. So let's figure out what we do with this. Put differently, a world is reorganized when something happens in it, and what happens in it is nothing but what follows from what happened. You see, meeting someone in a pub is ultimately nothing but what follows from it. Because if nothing follows from it, you really didn't meet someone in a pub. But if you really met someone in a pub, Maybe you get married and think, ah, bourgeois institutions, but well, that's fine. An event is nothing but what happened, nothing but its consequences in the world. If there has been an invention of mathematics, what our account of being is nothing but a consequence of what happened. And in this sense, an event is nothing but its consequences. It is what a subject makes of it. You can hear also a certain, I think, resonance of Heidegger in this, right? We talked about the unfolding of the truth of being, and I think there is quite a proximity. So a subject is unfolding a relation with the world of whose constitution it is not in control. There are now for Badiou different, let me call them parts or different types of operations within a subject. Some are simplifying. They produce what he calls points. They produce points. And others are opening. They open up new and heterogeneous perspectives. So again, if we fall in love, there is a new relationship with the world emerging. It is embodied in a couple, in a loving couple. It demands organization, quite a lot actually, usually. And sometimes it demands harsh either-or choices. Say, we never kiss anyone outside of our relationship, or we do. Just like either you go for one or the other. So some demand the formation of a set of principles. Others are rather explorative and are reflections about, say, additions, inventions of the form. Say, should we get a pet? Do we always go to a regular holiday destination together? Right? Do we implement any forms of rules? But this also means that one part of any subject, again, the embodiment of something that has happened in the world, which changes the relationship to it, forcefully induces what we might call a re-subjectivization, constantly, demanding principled decisions a lot of the times. And there's another part to the subject that is, in Badiou's words, rather, I quote, passive or even harmful. So there's a passive part of subjectivity that just thinks, yeah, let's introduce rules. I mean, we make it into a law, that's going to be fine. We go to Greece in August, full stop, or something like that. In this sense, any subject is the organization of a series of decisions, a way of bringing decisions together. It is what Badiou calls a sequence of continuities, and discontinuities, openings, and points. Right? So we introduce moments when we implement rules and when we undo rules. Yeah, let's just stop eating only avocado for breakfast. Just sucks, for example. A subject is thus the organization of either-or decisions and the explorative invention and creation of new either-or decisions. A couple is the way in which a couple makes principled decisions in their life that begin sometimes contingently and that explore, to speak in the vein of Walter Benjamin, the heterogeneous. A subject creates a new world, I quote Badiou, point by point, point by point. And he calls points an either-or decision. Decision by decision, and those decisions are invented by the newly created post-evental subject, a new world is generated. For, do not forget, a subject is a relation, notably one between an event and the world. And so if there is an event, we can get point by point, dot, 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 a new world. We reaffirm in each decision the foundational decision. This is what I'm trying to say. Right? Yes, I'm definitely going to call her. Yes, let's get the pet. Yes, okay. Yellow is great as a wall color. Or whatever, you get the point, right? In every, I mean, sometimes they're more vehement and of a greater magnitude, these decisions, and sometimes not. But they reaffirm over and over and over again Badiou thinks the constitution of subjectivity. But that means because they do that over and over again, they insist in what one could call almost a disappearance. Right? It's like a creative elision as creation, maybe a form of creative decreation. Dot, dot, dot. What for Badiou is created by a series of points is, as I said earlier, a truth, because of the truth. Subject is what mediates an event and the creation of a truth. And it's precisely here that he claims that there's a fourfold, this is my Heideggerianism, of affects that can or has to be subjectively registered in any creation of any truth. I quote, four affects signal the incorporation of the human animal into a subjective truth process. What are those four elements that make up a subject? Or to remain in the example, a couple in love. The first, Badiou quite provocatively calls terror. And he means by this the, I quote, desire for a great point, a decisive discontinuity that will institute the new world in a single blow. When I met you, my life changed forever. Everything in it. That's what he calls terror. So there's a moment in any subject that is terroristic, terrorizing, a moment that embodies a desire to blow it all off. Not only to blow off steam, but to blow off the world, to explode it, to undo it entirely. And again, recall the subject is the relation between an event and the world. So a new couple, for example, has certainly the tendency to say, screw you to all established traditions if there's really a moment where two individuals fall in love. I mean, right, you forget your friends, you forget your hobbies, you don't care about your job, right? Because it's only about that one person, obviously. We might call this the desire to end all things existing, which is for Badiou linked to the beginning of subjectivity. At the advent of any new subject wants to annihilate whatever was there before. The second element is what Badiou describes in terms of anxiety. I quote, the second affect testifies to the fear of points, the retreat before the obscurity of the discontinuities of everything that imposes a choice without guarantee between two hypotheses. To put it otherwise, this affect signals the desire for a continuity, for a monotonous shelter. We call it anxiety. Anxiety, and this is now crucial, I think he learned this lesson from Freud and Lacan, is a defense mechanism, the most basic one, but still a defense mechanism. And so what we get immediately after we get the desire for a complete redoing of the world is a desire for some continuity. We see all could be otherwise. But anxiety actually says, no, please, let me keep it. Please. Don't just like shake it all off. So it's a registration of a simplification. Either I love her or I don't. But comes with an inclination to withdraw from the choice imposed. Maybe I can try it for a bit and just test it out if it works. Maybe it works. I don't have to go all in immediately. Anxiety, in the sense as Freud and Lacan both state, is a defense mechanism. It is an indexing of a choice, but a refraining from this very choice at the very same time. And this is where, for Badiou, courage comes. It is, in his parlance, the affirmation and, I quote, the acceptance of the plurality of points of the fact that discontinuities are at once inexorable and multiform, unquote. Courage, different from anxiety, but structurally somewhat identical with it, sees that one has to choose, but it does not refrain from choosing. It rather identifies the multiform nature of a choice as such and sees that one must explore the infinite consequences of a choice. Let me put it like this. Anxiety says, okay, shit, either I love her or I don't. Courage says, yeah, but I can love her and this can mean a million different things. Right? You see, it's an exploration of the very infinity inscribed into the reduction of a point. Terror is what means the desire for one great choice that is more of a choice than any other. Anxiety is the identification of such a choice, but the refraining from it. Courage now shows that the apparent simplification of choosing is linked also to an imminent infinitization of what the choice will potentially have produced. Right? It basically says, yes, I have to choose. That's absolutely true. Anxiety is correct. And terror is also correct. But I can pacify it somewhat. I can work with it somewhat because there's an infinity of possible ways in which I can do it. This is why Badiou adds, we need a fourth affect now. And he calls this justice. quite a strong term to call it an affect. Justice is what allows for a clarification of the very dosage of anxiety and the very degree to which we need to apply courage. So when yesterday Mladen spoke about shame, right? Badiou's answer would be justice is what we need. Just the right dosage, so to speak. Justice, I quote, affirms the desire for the subject to be a constant intrication of points and openings with respect to the preeminence of becoming subject. It affirms the equivalence of what is continuous and negotiated on the one hand, and of what is discontinuous and violent on the other. So we just need the right measure of when we need, let's say, as a couple, sometimes to really angstify us. Either we do this or not. And that is decisive. We have to courageously explore how to do it. But when these choices need to be made, for that we need a measurement. And that's what courage does, what justice does. So no courage without justice. So justice provides courage with a measure. There is no hierarchy between the four affects, but we might say that terror is, for Badiou, what allows us to identify a great choice. Anxiety delimits what precisely it is, but refrains from taking it. Courage is endorsing a particular choice because it affirms the possibility of infinite consequences, and justice indicates when and how precisely to make a choice. When it's time for terror. Justice is, in other words, the indication of when is it time for terror. When is it time for anxiety? When is it time for courage? It is thus an affect that reflexively organizes the affects as affects, we could say, that have an equal bearing and equal status. So there is no primacy of anxiety, no primacy of terror, no primacy of courage. Justice indicates that per se, per concept, or per affect, one should not give any primacy to terror, anxiety, or courage. One can start with either, and the subjectivization involves all of them at once and implies, therefore, an organization of these affects. But falling in love does not come without terror, anxiety, courage, and a moment of organizing them in a just way. You can't constantly think, shit, she's really going to leave me if I'm going to do this. This is what's going to break us. You can't always think it, but sometimes you have to. Right? Justice means thus that one has to organize terror, anxiety, and courage adequately. It, I quote, Badiou affirms the equivalence of what is continuous and negotiated on the one hand, and what is discontinuous and violent on the other. Justice is thus what provides a measure for the right dosage of anxiety, the right dosage of terror, the right dosage of courage. But to provide such a measure is obviously an extremely, technically speaking, terrorist, angstifying, and courageous act. Right? So it is imminently linked with the other. So it's not a neutral measure. It's never a neutral measure because it's imminent. It comes from within a practice. In other terms, one cannot simply get courage without terror and anxiety and justice for Badiou, but one also does never get any justice without terror and anxiety and courage. At least not when one is talking about subjective embodiments. Badiou here invokes Beckett's famous line, I must go on, I can't go on, I will go on, as formula of this transition. Terror, anxiety, courage, justly organized. I must go on, I can't go on, I will go on. I must think what equality, I cannot go on, I cannot go on after all the terrible experiences we made with it. I will continue to experiment what equality is. Subjects for Badiou in my reading are formed not only from knots, but from dots, from dotting a line, from operating dottingly. And to undo lines into dots implies terror and leads to anxiety, but allows for the courage to weave dots together into, well, probably a new just line. And it is here that, to my mind, it would be extremely interesting, and I'm not doing this, to reread Heidegger's engagement with Ernst Jünger, the right-wing writer, which was called Across the Line in English, and in German, Über die Linie, and is Heidegger's critique of Jünger, who's constantly traversing and thereby not able to see the line. The political implications here are quite pertinent. And I would argue that Badiou allows to claim that certain times rather demand one of the four affects than another. So he suggests that sometimes it's rather the time for terror. Sometimes it's rather the time for anxiety. Sometimes it's rather the time for courage. And sometimes it's rather the time to emphasize justice. And he has published a text in 2006 where he argued that now it's the time for courage. Now we need to have courage. Now we have to somewhat persist. I want to end by bringing in directly political and collective practice and by turning to Lenin. Lenin was once described as a proponent of a politics of truth. That's the title of a collection of essays edited by Sebastian Budgen, Statis Kouvelakis, and Slavoj Žižek. And one could say, to cite one of the authors of this collection, namely Frederick Jameson, that if Jean-François Lyotard once spoke of a desire called Marx, a desire for emancipation that articulates itself in a very specific way, inter alia, and from a certain point onwards as a desire to understand the distortions constitutive of the present world in the form of a critique of political economy, there's also a desire called Lenin. This is Frederick Jameson's felicitous turn of phrase. The desire called Lenin is a desire for infusing politics with truth. And with all the terror, anxiety, and courage, but justice this amounts to. Since Lenin insists over and over again on the need to, I quote, to show or voice things as they actually are, unquote. To speak the truth to the masses, to make the masses see the truth, to speak clear and trenchantly. The more trenchant and briefer, the better. The slogan and its concrete conjunctural politics finds its discursive place exactly there, as the slogan, the Losung, allows for the right kind of pointed and condensed punctuation of a conjuncture. And they rely obviously on a concrete analysis of this very concrete situation. So Lenin has a theory of how one has to speak politically, and the name for that is slogan. Jean-Jacques Le Cercle has argued that the slogan names a point in time, a specific task, realizes part of this task, which lies in actually identifying the task in the first place, and is therefore part and parcel as well as expression of a concrete analysis. All power to the Soviets. It's doing exactly that, right? It's creating a situation where the task is named. So we can learn anything from Lenin about, can we learn anything from Lenin about courage? What would a Leninist theory and practice of courage be? What does a politics of truth, why does a politics of truth also need to entail a politics of courage? Why that is so, it seems to me, is not because courage is taken to be an Aristotelian virtue, to always know one's capacities, know the enemy's capacities, know the situation, and reasonably apply oneself for the purpose of a greater good. Rather, courage here plays a role because, I quote Lenin citing Marx, insurrection is an art. Insurrection is an art. And as Engels would say, this is so because it creates the very reality into which it intervenes through the very way in which it intervenes in it. It is the gradual production of a political situation while insurrecting in it to give it a Kleistian ring. Hegel's pointed remarks on insurrection from his 1851-1852 Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Germany, which was published under Marx's name. They were such good friends that Engels sometimes just wrote 500 pages and said, "No, I published it under your name, it's fine." I mean, quite something, actually. Which was published under Marx's name, and Lenin affirmatively cites at some point, and this text, so Engels' text, ends with a reference to a formula by Danton from a speech from the 2nd of September 1792, where Danton demands to implement rules of conduct for all citizens. So, French Revolution, right? And he says, okay, we need universal rules. And he ends this speech by saying, de l'audace, encore de l'audace. Audacity, audacity, and again, audacity. Lenin cites this thing that is cited by Engels. This is what is needed to be successful with an insurrection, with treating insurrection as an art, with making insurrection artistically. And it might, in this context, not be irrelevant that Lenin repeatedly calls Soviets organs of insurrection. The subjective body, to speak here again like Badiou for a moment, of a politics of truth is thus construed and made up of organs of insurrection, those cells in which the people govern themselves, as Lenin will claim, an insurrectional, insurrecting body, and a body image, which is not simply put up and erected, and which one then identifies with, as in Lacan's famous mirror stage, but insurrected, a body that rises up within and against the body, an insurrection that resurrects what any erected authority and its image seeks to obliviate. For organs of insurrection, again, the Soviets, to become successful in the art of insurrection, what is needed, that's Lenin's line, is audacity, it's courage, it's fortitude. 1917, right? I mean, they just got to power. That's right. How does one make a successful revolution? Ask Lenin. Audacity is the answer. Insurrection needs to be courageous. So this is a crucial element of Lenin's 1970 plea. I cite the Bolsheviks must assume power, elected to the Central Committee and the Petrograd and Moscow committees of the RDSLP from September 1917. I quote, "We must remember and weigh Marx's words about insurrection. Insurrection is an art." You see, to be courageous means to be organizing insurrection artistically. Remember and think them through, because it is in this way that political action and organization can remain self-determined and find a strategy and a conjunctural line against, I'm citing here again Alain Badiou, what one might call the dominant forms of the bourgeois politics of fear, of which Lenin was a very perspicacious analyst. For it is exactly the fear-mongering, the perpetual creation and administration of fear that Lenin identifies as one of the crucial tactics of bourgeois political, of his bourgeois political enemy. Fear is the worst enemy, as he once states, and notes repeatedly in 1917. He notes repeatedly in 1917 that the bourgeoisie uses, for example, the scarecrow of anarchism against the very idea of a possible revolution. He's basically saying anyone who's arguing for revolution, they will just bring chaos. So, okay, it's not great what we have, but if you go down that line, it will be worse. They make the people fearful, and this prevents any but a reactive and heteronomously determined form of action. And even with the political conjuncture, it is one of the defining features of opportunism, as Slavoj Žižek has remarked in his earliest book on Lenin, that it is defined as the position that is afraid and fearful with regard to any revolutionary action. So opportunism is a form of the beautiful soul for Žižek. Bourgeois economy is politically, from this point of view, always a political economy of fear. That's Lenin's point. A production, reproduction, and administration of fear for the purpose of suspending any other than reactive forms of subjective politicization. So bourgeois society makes us afraid all the time, and that is what it does. That's part and parcel of its operation. Which is why the concrete analysis of concrete situation also implies that we're thinking through what Lenin calls, I quote, the actual and not the possible situation. We should forget the possible. We get distracted by possibilities. It's a very brutal and wonderful argument, I find. It is because possibility sometimes can be oppressive. Right? We think possibility is always cool, but it isn't. Lenin is saying, no. Possibility is what bourgeois economy constantly uses to make you afraid, all the time. So let's just look at actuality and not think about possibility. It is such an analysis that allows for problematically endorse what in the task of the proletariat in our revolution Lenin called unfulfillable hopes, or a politics of the goodwill. Against this, Lenin claims revolutionary distrust. That's his term, revolutionary distrust. For the proletariat must teach the people to mistrust the bourgeoisie. Revolutionary mistrust, revolutionary caution, or as another translation goes, and I have to apologize, I don't have any Russian, so I'm working with the English and the German. Revolutionary caution or mistrust is the other side of emancipatory courage and audacity. Which is why Lenin in April 1917, at the 7th All-Russia Conference, argues against any politics of merely subjective desires and wishes and hopes, and indicates that what is politically crucial is caution, 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 or in another translation, mistrust, again, mistrust and mistrust. We might say anxiety, anxiety, and again, anxiety. So the repetitive insistence on caution and mistrust is directed toward the production of the reactive affect of fear, and hence against reactive subjectivization, as well as against all forms of, let's call it, spontaneous metaphysics of political action and organization that assumes too much certainty where there is none, but as well against all wavering and vacillation, against all indecision on the other hand side. So in some sense, what we encounter here, it is a courage to face anxiety. Anxiety, anxiety, encore anxiety, mistrust, mistrust, encore mistrust, audacity, audacity, encore audacity. It is a mistrust that courageously, one might say, is directed against thinking and speaking in mere phrases, for it's precisely the petite bourgeoisie whose, I cite, naive wishes articulates themselves in mere phrases, and thereby idle talk, and thereby also allow, as Lenin claims in an almost Maoist formula, to identify where there is, I quote, the bourgeoisie in the workers' movement. That's the big problem. Emancipation itself has been undermined by idle talk. This is why, be cautious, be cautious, be cautious. On the other side, be courageous, be courageous, be courageous. To not give way to one's emancipatory desire means to organize revolutionary mistrust and caution, to face terror but also be anxious, and it means to have the audacity that is needed to practice the art of insurrection, or insurrection as an art, the right measure of anxiety, one might say. To be courageous enough to demand, well, a collective desire for what? A collective desire for a collective desire. That's Lenin's point, I think. What we need to organize is a collective desire for a collective desire. For Lenin's courageous politics is a politics without hope, as I would say, for hope is a reactive category, as is fear. Both rely on the possible. In Lenin's words, this is from his honest defensism reveals itself from the 1st of April 1917. I quote, to believe that the capitalist class will mend its ways, will cease to be the capitalist class, will give up its profits, is a fatuous hope, an idle dream, and in effect a deception of the people. If you just say, well, some rich people will just pay for making this better, that's a fatuous hope. Right, that's this point. Mistrust all certainties, we might say, as, I quote, history is moving in zigzag and by roundabout ways. Lenin. And hence, any assumption of too much objective orientation, any subjective desire for too much constancy is a way of giving way to one's desire for transformation and emancipation. It means to accept that it is never the right time, but can always be absolutely the wrong time. It means to have the courage to use one's own understanding. It means to stop being, as he states in the task of the proletariat in our revolution, afraid of ourselves. That's the greatest political danger. To be afraid of ourselves. I think Slavoj once put it quite nicely at the communism conference in New York. He basically said, well, we are the ones we're waiting for. So don't go out looking for who's going to do it. Right? That's what it means, not to be afraid of ourselves. Not be afraid of ourselves, to break with one's intuitive and habituative forms of desiring, and to accept that, I quote, no sequence can be established for revolutions, unquote. They do not have a pre-written script. This is why they're historical. It means not to fear the truth as he attacks the bourgeois press in April 1917, and as he tells the soldiers in the of the Izmailovsky regiment on April 1910th, on the April 10th, trust no one. Depend only on your own intelligence and experience. What a thing to say, right? I mean, he's Lenin at that time. They just made the revolution and he goes see them. Don't trust me. Trust no one. Just trust yourself. In other words, have the courage to turn a deaf ear to anyone. Subtract yourself from that which is presented as unchangeable laws of objectivity. Not to be afraid to rely only on oneself, collectively and hence on others, on the most heterogeneous sources, and of the truth means to have the courage to confine in one's yet to be determined capacities. Lenin writes, that's also 1917, our revolution will be invincible if it is not afraid of itself. Early days, October 1917. The courage of the revolution might be the courage to start thinking, to pun Spinoza here, that no one has yet determined what a proletariat or a political body can do. So let's do it. Let's explore the relationship between an event and the world and make a body. The way I'm about to end, the way this can be determined is by having the courage to treat insurrection as an art. That's Lenin's idea, insurrection as an art. For this is what is needed, as Lenin famously says, if one seeks, I quote, to remain faithful to Marx. Remain faithful to Marx. Fidelity to Marxism means to treat insurrection as an art. What does that mean? Lenin on the 8th of October 1917 gives a 5-point answer recapping Engels. First, be serious. Always go all the way. There's no half-ass insurrection. Insurrection is nothing that one could not mean seriously if one starts it. Second, concentrate, namely all forces. Otherwise, the insurrection will be destroyed. Third, act with the greatest determination once you have begun. Always take the offensive, never be defensive. Fourth, surprise the enemy. Fifth, strive for daily successes. And Lenin at this passage writes, it's a text, I just look at it, it's really, really good text. It's called Advice of an Onlooker. Advice of an Onlooker. As a Hegelian, one must love that already, right? You're just looking at it. I'm quoting Lenin. Marx summed up the lessons of all revolution in respect to armed uprising in the words of Danton. Now he's quoting Marx, but actually Engels. The greatest master of revolutionary policy yet known, de l'audace, encore de l'audace, unquote. So audacity, audacity, encore audacity sums up in Lenin's reading of Engels the lessons of all thus far uprisings in the history of mankind. That's quite a claim. Courage, that's it. Courage makes events. In other words, politics, immense word politics is nothing, has never been anything but a politics of audacity and courage. The art of insurrection is courageous as it attempts to brush reality anew, as Benjamin at one point wrote. History thus might be nothing but the, in the sense of this English expression, wrong or failed attempts, repeated acts of collective courage, working with anxiety, traversing a moment of terror, and working against externally induced fear. But history, in any relevant sense, then is nothing but the history of collective artistic creations, the history of courage. This is Lenin's claim. History is made of courage. In times in which, and I mean history, seems to be such a thing missing and generally absent, and when things look grimmer than I suppose at least all of the previous years that I have been alive, 100 years after Lenin's passing, he died 100 years ago, this might be a lesson to be learned from one of the greatest masters of revolutionary policy yet known. Audacity, 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 encore. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Are you prepared for a few questions?
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. Let's see, well, probably not, but yes, let's go for it.
So I was thinking about your course this past week and how you talked about how courageous it is to grapple with your own awareness of your nothingness and the potential of death. And the best that you can do with that anxiety is to wrestle with it in the form of like poetry. And I mean, I was thinking of it more broadly as like writing, like creating something that you can relate to the other with, something that you can communicate your own struggle. So I'm curious what you're talking about today with courage. I'm curious about the potential of language and in particular writing to be an event in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I mean, I just very briefly alluded to it, but so what interests me or interested me and keeps on interesting me in Lenin. It's a weird thing to say out loud, honestly, because Lenin feels so outdated. It's totally fine to be, I don't know, studying Marx, but once you say Lenin, everyone thinks you're a bit of a weirdo. But okay, bear with me for a moment. So Lenin is really interesting in respect to exactly what you asked, because he has an idea of, let's say, a creative language practice, and that is linked to what he calls a slogan. What is a slogan? A slogan really, he says, I think in a writing from February 1918, the more trenchant we formulate and the briefer, the better. So the more condensed we can say it, the better is it, right? So all powers to the Soviet, great. It's just a few words. What does that mean? We mold language in such a way that through language, through a symbolic representation, the situation looks different to us. We're oriented in it. We're oriented in it. Why? Because we are now in a situation where we think, okay, what does it mean to act according to that thing that we now can take as if it were a categorical imperative? So what does it mean to act, to think of all my actions such that they are in accordance with all power to the Soviets? I mean, just think what it would mean for us to think about this right now, right? There are no Soviets, I know, but nevertheless, right? And what does it mean? Or just like, what does it mean to conceive of yourself and all what you think you should do from the perspective of all proletarians of the world should unite, right? That means you have to invent forms in which one debates, for example, forms in which one organizes, forms in which one meets. They're just not given somehow, right? So one has to create them. And so in this sense, your question is really, really the absolutely right and pertinent one, because I think it is especially globally, more or less, that especially the right is extremely amazing in generating symbolic representations of the world and debunking or taking over previous symbolic representations of the left, right? Trump is speaking of revolution. So the word is gone somehow. It has been assimilated to the other side. So what does it mean to find the right way in the right language, right? As Lacan would say, a formulation that works, a way of saying that works, that does something. That's the question. I think that's an immensely political question. And this is why I think it's interesting that Lenin speaks or refers to that formula that Marx generated, treating insurrection as if it were an art, right? What does that mean? It basically means we don't know how to do it before we do it. So it needs experimentation, right? It needs testing. It needs experiments. Right? We need to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And that means we need to figure out what is the language in which we can talk about this. What is the adequate, appropriate, what is the language that works? Right? Lenin will just sometimes say, peace and land was another slogan. Right? He says in, I think, late 1918, it's absolutely the wrong slogan. We should never say it. He goes as far as saying, we should never, ever use the word dictatorship of the proletariat. We should never, because we're so far away from it. Or he says, that's also 1918, never use the word equality, never, because it's a lie. So we should only start using that word in a certain. So the question is, what are the words that we use, right? What are the right words that work, that orient us, that say something? So I think you're absolutely spot on. creation is about finding the right symbolic tools. And there is no manual in advance, I think. Thank you.
Tamara, are there questions from online? No.
There-
Okay.
Hi. I got a little bit stuck on we are reaffirming its decision in the foundational decision. And somehow everything that has been said has been making me face the idea of how everything that's happening now, it's a reaffirmation of everything that's happening in the past. And somehow the revolution sounds like a flip or like a step in the opposite direction. Whereas when we're talking about tools for revolution, even if we're using words or ideas, it feels like all words and ideas have been already also assimilated by every counter-revolutionary force. And I remember when I was at some point in Brazil, somebody told me if the revolution ever happens, it will not be in Europe because you're too busy making new rules and talking about the revolution. And I think that's also true for everywhere in the world. And now I'm thinking, okay, I'm also here, and I think we're here fantasizing with the idea and talking about it and taking it very seriously, where I'm thinking, I think in my lifetime, it seems like I'm just gonna experience the continuous reaffirmation of the foundational decisions and just see the planet very slowly rot as an apple and just go into the, I think you also said the insistence of the disappearance onto itself. And that's slightly saddening because I'm thinking, okay, how can I also align all my actions and all my decisions with these ideals that I think I have, and yet I think I'm gonna continue to live in this privileged life of not doing anything. That's it.
No, I mean, so on the one hand side, I think your question points to a point that Slavoj Žižek made recently in the book Before Christian Atheism. I keep forgetting what it was called, where he basically says, well, the revolution is what capitalism is greatest at. It revolutionizes everything all the time. Just the most revolutionary force. I mean, that's already Marx's line, actually, right? Marx and Engels and the Communist Manifesto say exactly that, right? All that is solid melts into air, right? Becomes steam, literally in German, right? Because he's thinking of the steam engine. But what does it mean that what do we do with a situation where even the very idea of revolution is obscure, right? Entirely obscure, because the only way we encounter something revolutionary is by encountering the very society in which we live that can just assimilate anything and revolutionizes itself in all directions, right? I mean, Fukuyama could still believe, yeah, it's getting better. I mean, it's just liberalism plus parliamentary democratic form. But there's more slavery nowadays than ever in the history of mankind. Right? So regression is not a problem for capitalism, not at all. I mean, but it progresses, and Marx was very well aware of that. It progresses through regressing. And there are sub-economies and sub-economies that get worse and worse. So Slavoj Žižek, this is where I wanted to take this, suggested, okay, this is why we should not any longer dream about a fanciful revolution, but just hardcore talk blatantly about a new order. What should a new order look like? Not what is the day of the revolution, of the transformation. What do we actually want society to look like? Right. And that is, I think, his critique of the romanticism of the revolution. That constantly thinks, well, yeah, we all come together and it's just like we are all on that square and we drink their wine and take their gold and laugh at them, and then what? I mean, that's his point. But I think I would say the complacency that you describe, or one can also counter it. And this is why I actually wanted to talk about Lenin, even though It's probably quite a career killer. But you at one point makes, I think, quite wonderful suggestion. He says what we need, and the we is the we of people thinking about and being interested in emancipation, is what he calls an encyclopedia of exceptions. An encyclopedia of exceptions. And what he means by that is that why should other people tell us what the Russian Revolution was and what failed in it? Why should other people know better about Mao and the Maoist movements? Why should they tell us how the Maoists in India work? Why should they tell us what failed in Cuba? And the they I use like almost in a Heideggerian sense right now, right? I mean, no. One should be very harsh about what failed. Absolutely. I mean, it's no way that anyone can defend the Russian Revolution or anyone could defend anything about the Cultural Revolution, I think. Yet, however, if one just thinks it was deemed or doomed to fail from its very inception, something is wrong, right? Because then you just end up by basically criminalizing millions of people and saying they were all just deluded. But understanding what actually happened. How did workers organize themselves together with students and soldiers in China? Why don't we know? Why don't we talk about these things if we really are interested in questions of different forms of organization? If we aren't, fine. But if we are, I mean, it's not like we have to start with nothing, right? So millions of people have made experiences that we can just learn from. And why wouldn't we? Put differently, I mean, this is what Hegel thinks actual history is. It's an organization of forgetting and an organization of experience, right? And if we are the ones who challenge the organization of oblivion, in a very Heideggerian manner, we could say, even, right? We don't want other people to tell us what is, what counts as what exists, what counts as options. Then yeah, we should spend time actually reading and studying these things. Not to become Leninist. I'm not a Leninist, that would be weird. But Lenin, for a long period of his life, called himself a Jacobin. What does it mean that he's a Jacobin in Russia? Right? More than 150 years later, I mean, you see, you get the point. What does it mean to remain faithful to something, an egalitarian potential in the French Revolution, in a context that is fundamentally different? If you raise a question like this, yes, you need to invent an answer. But you have a task then. You see what I'm trying to say? A task that can make you immensely creative. What does it mean to be a Jacobin today? And that's not, I mean, last sentence, right? I mean, Rosa Luxemburg called herself a Spartacist. Why? Because she wanted to remain faithful to the Spartacist slave rebellion. Ages before. What does it mean to be a Spartacist today? What does it mean to be a Jacobin today? What does it, right? I mean, you get my point. What does it mean to think in these categories and to salvage, to insist that it's not simply because it's over, it's all gone. No, how to persist? That's, I think, the question. I think that is what Lenin said. Audacity. Let's just be Jacobins today.
Frank, we have one online. Yolanda. Yolanda, can you hear us? So yeah, she hears us, but does not respond. So Yuri can ask his question. Okay.
Thank you. So all week I've been grappling this anxiety courage couple, and listening to you today, question comes up in my head: where would you in all this situate belief. So just small comments to how I try to explain myself, how I find this kind of this twin brother in there somewhere, and why it's not, well, it fits in, but doesn't fit in so much, especially with you bringing in Lenin today. There is this, I ask myself, does courage come first or does it come after belief? And also courage, there's so many kinds of courage. And if I think of belief, I also think it goes directly into kind of I'm not, I don't want to talk about religious belief, just like a general, using the word more generally. What do you believe in? Is kind of a parallel question in my head to what are you afraid of, or what is anxiety to you? And to believe can make one, or just the idea of belief can make one anxious. I was just thinking that earlier, and but belief also, if correct me if I'm wrong, but creates courage, creates all kinds of courage, I guess, to follow certain,
Yeah. No, I think a very important question, and I didn't speak about this at all the last couple of days with you. I mean, sometimes belief is a really interesting and tricky category, I think, because I mean, let me say two things. The first is, you know, Pascal has this kind of wonderful line that if you think about what are the advantages and disadvantages of believing or not believing in God, he means. If you don't believe in him or her or it, and she doesn't exist, that's fine. If you don't believe in her and she exists, that's quite bad, right? But if you believe in her and she exists, that's great. And if you believe in her and she doesn't exist, that's a bit disappointing, but well, I mean, it's far less bad than not believing in her when she actually exists. So it is a total advantage to believe, right? So just if you gamble your chances, right? And Pascal then has a very good line, because then the question is, okay, I don't believe, but how can I get started? How do I get my belief kickstarted? And Pascal's line for that is, well, kneel down and you'll believe. Just act as if, and belief will come. Just go to church every Sunday or whatever. And then automatically you will start to believe. What is brilliant about this is that Pascal sees that belief is not something that we consciously decide upon. Right? It's never a moment where you think, oh, I probably believe in God. Yeah, I mean, I read the book. Book is not great. But still, I mean, I think I believe in God. Right? It's never the question of an argument. Right? It would be very weird. Let's say we go out for drinks and I tell you why you need to believe in God. It will never really happen then afterwards. Okay, got it. Yes, absolutely. You convinced me. It is in our practices. It is in our practices. It comes through a certain way in which we relate to the world, right? And I think, therefore, the link to courage is, what does it mean to challenge all the beliefs that we have, of which we're not entirely aware? Because Marx will say that there is a belief that we all share. He describes that in terms of commodity fetishism. I mean, let me, to put a very complicated thing quite simply. If I buy a new shirt, I sometimes think, oh, it makes me look cool. Well, it doesn't. The shirt doesn't do anything. But that I believe that a thing has the power to do anything, is inbuilt, Marx believes, in the form of the commodity. It's not me being totally stupid, right? We all do that, necessarily. So we equip a thing with capacities and powers that it doesn't have, right? Not because, I mean, if someone would ask me, do you think your shirt does something? I would say, are you mental? No, of course not. But then I think it just makes me look cool, right? I mean, you get the point, right? I am unaware of my beliefs very often, so I can unconsciously believe. And this is where things get very tricky, because the question then is, how do we change unconscious beliefs? Beliefs that we're not really aware of, right? Because they're inscribed into our practices. And I think this is where I would say the point that I was trying to make about anxiety and courage comes in. Because anxiety has something to do with the very foundations of our practices, right? In which a certain belief can be very functional. So if we're really anxious, it can shake off, at least the authors we talked about, our beliefs for a moment. We can just think, yeah, just a moment ago I thought there's harmony in the world, and right now I think it's just all horrible. But that gives us potentially a chance to do something about the very form of our being in the world, of how we enact with the world. I hope that makes sense to you. Yes, please.
Frank, this should be the last one.
Okay.
If that's it.
Okay.
I also wanted to say something about the belief, because you were talking about the wager on wager.
Yeah.
So one even like wagers that there is something like possible, like an event, and I have to wager this.
Yeah.
So I think I cannot even know that I believe. Like more anxious it would be I believe that I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was thinking about the notion of the Holy Spirit, like it's the community of the believers, not of the knowers or something like this.
Yeah.
And it's really like this. It's not really a community which share some general ideas or something. They're really like for themselves, but they build some kind of a club without being part of anything or something.
Exactly. Yeah, no, thank you for that. So yeah, the idea, so I think, I mean, I just lay my cards on the table, and I think this is what for me brings together, and that was always sort of my project, Hegel and Badiou. That was always what I was trying to do. And in this sense, I think why I'm deeply Hegelian and at the same time Badiousian is because both think philosophy is worth nothing if it just explains what is. But it wagers on what? On people being able to wager, to risk something. Because that is what constitutes moments in life that are worth anything, actually. Where you sometimes say, fuck it, I'm doing art differently. Or fuck it, no, that's the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. Or fuck it, no, there's a terrorist regime going on in Spain, and I'm just a poet, but I'm gonna get a gun and I'm gonna travel there now. As people have done. I mean, right? One should not forget. It's not just made up. It's just what people actually did. I told you, I mean, some of you don't know that anecdote, but I told that to the people in my class. So Adorno returns from exile after the Nazi regime. So he was in the US, and meets someone who was in the German resistance. And basically asks him, how the hell were you able to do it? I mean, how the hell? The answer he gets is, we just had to. Just had to. There was no question about it. And that is a wager, right? Because a wager is the identification of a new necessity, I would say, right? A new type of necessity. There's otherwise doesn't exist. The link to the Holy Spirit is really great, I think, because the Holy Spirit, at least in Hegel's reading, is what we get after Jesus dies on the cross. What does it mean that Jesus dies on the cross? It means that God is actually dead. It's just dead. And when Jesus says before, where 2 or 3 of you come together, I will be with them, that's the Holy Spirit. But what does the Holy Spirit mean? There's no God. It means it's just us. We create the thing that we believe in. It's us. It was us in the first place. This is why Hegel celebrates Christianity, because Hegel thinks Christianity is a religion of the end of all religions. Right? And the Holy Spirit is exactly that. But it also means that the thing does not exist without us being active for it. Put differently, I mean, to use a slogan that Slavoj, I think, coined at one point, communism is an idea that only exists when one acts for it. It's nothing. I mean, it's not a program. Right? It is us who invented it. And we can't call it differently, right? I mean, if you feel awkward with it, but you get the point, right? I mean, it is not as if it were already made. And that's the Holy Spirit point, right? We believe in things and create it. And that is what Christianity tells us. Yeah. We create a representation of a world that someone created, and we call that thing God. But that's us. We create the world. That's what we see from the perspective of Holy Spirit. That's quite a wager, right? To come together and think, yeah, we can do that. But I think one should wager on these wagers. Absolutely. Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you.